Hello, and welcome to the Stoicism Philosophy as a Way of Life podcast. My name is Donald Robertson, and I have with me today my good friend Jim Vaselopulos, and we're going to talk about his new book, which is about clarity. Hey, Jim, so do you want to say a little bit about who you are and what you do to introduce yourself to our listeners?
Thank you, Donald. It's an honor to be with you today. I really enjoy it. I, I don't think there's anything super special about me. I'm a business guy. I've done some things. I've built some companies and, been in business for a long time. And I always like to tell people that, now my job is helping other people open their presence because I've already opened mine. And I'm a business advisor. I'm an executive coach, and I just enjoy helping people open their presence. That's what I do now. It's fun.
Tell us a little bit about the companies that you built. Like, what did they do?
I kind of got lucky and got involved in the internet pretty early. And, one of the first companies we had was, building websites and stuff like that very early on. And so built that up, moved on from that, learned a lot of lessons, made a lot of mistakes, missed out on a lot of opportunities that had I been a little bit wiser and older, I probably would have capitalized on more. Then went into another consulting organization where we did a lot more management consulting as well as technology consulting, and then built a software as a service company that we eventually sold and did quite well on that one. So that was nice, but mostly in the tech space has been my career.
Cool. Jim, what would you do differently if you could turn back the clock and do it all again?
That's a fair question. I
It's a
think
tough question. Have you got an answer prepared? Like,
I think I would have been a little bit more sophisticated with money in you're taking outside investments. Keeping 100% of a small pie is a lot less profitable than keeping a small percent of a really big pie. So early on, we were involved in the internet. I mean, really, really early. And before it was even called the internet, we were involved in like DARPANET from the defense industry. And so we had some skills and we were doing quite well with those skills, but there were a lot of other companies that were trying to get into the space once it became more powerful and commercial. And, I kind of resisted outside investment because I'm like, why do I need your money? I'm already ahead of you.
Yeah.
I'm already ahead of you in the race. Well, a couple of years went by and, other companies had, millions of dollars in marketing budgets and everything else. And we got squashed for the most part. I was just a little bit naive and young,
Makes sense. And now you're helping other people. Like, how did you end up helping other people?
It's interesting. It was never really my intention to kind of get down that path, but I was always did quite well helping my clients with more than just, let's say, the technology solutions my company provided, giving them just good sound counsel and advice. And I guess people always appreciated that. And I enjoyed it. And then, as I sold that last company, people were asking me, what do you want to do? And I said, maybe I'll run another company. I don't know what I'll do. And then a good friend just said, like, why don't you just do what you've always been doing and help other people? And I was like, that's interesting. I was like, do you think people would pay me for that? Because typically I would just help them for free. And they said, yeah, I think people will pay you for that. And so I just kind of tried it, and I found out that I should have done it probably 10 years earlier. I love it. It brings a lot of joy in my life to help other people not make all the mistakes I made.
Well, there's no shortage of people out there that want help. And there's even more people that need help.
Yeah, indeed there are.
So, and that's led you on a path. You got into you run your own businesses, and then you get into helping other people, and now you've ended up right now that you're about to release your book, publish your book. How did you get to publishing the book?
I think I even went back and, like, even when I was early in my career, I always had like these aspirations of kind of writing a book on something I understood. And I had a lot of encouragement from the co-host of my podcast, Leadership Podcast, which you've been a guest on, to say, hey, Jim, you need to write a book. And he and a lot of other people were saying, write a book on sales, because I do a lot of sales coaching and help people with that. And I said, I don't want to write a book on sales, because what I tend to do is much more broad in context and help people holistically with their business. And so I thought carefully about it. I'm like, what is it that people value, when they work with me? And I thought maybe it was, wisdom. And I went pretty deep in researching wisdom and that was part of my path into Stoicism and everything else. And, folks like you and Dan Pink helped me kind of talk to the right people and really do my research. But then what I found is I spoke with clients was they really didn't value wisdom as much as they valued the clarity that resulted from
Yeah.
wisdom. And that's really where then that topic, kind of piqued my curiosity. Is like, okay, let me think about that process and how does that happen and what do people value? It's a
Right.
big topic, but it really forced me to clarify my thoughts. And I don't even care if anyone reads the book. Honestly, I hope people do, and I hope they find value. But the reality is, it helped me clarify my thinking on the subject just by
Uh-huh.
putting pen to
There
paper.
you go.
And there's a lot of
Yeah.
value in that.
Is it Benjamin Disraeli said the best way to learn about a subject is to write a book about it. That's one of my favorite quotes. It definitely it clarifies your own thinking, focuses the mind
Indeed.
when you have to write a book about it. Well, let's start at the beginning then. What is the full title of the book?
The full title is Clarity: Business Wisdom to Work Less and Achieve More.
Okay, so let's get a question. I've got a good question that emerges from that immediately. Jim, what is the difference? You've touched on this a little bit, but let's dig a little bit deeper into it. What is the relationship between wisdom and clarity?
I think clarity is an outcome of wisdom. I think clarity is an outcome. Wisdom is a process. Wisdom is something you chase but you never achieve. I think if you ever feel like you've achieved it, you are completely fooling yourself. It's always around the corner. It's always a false summit that can never be achieved. But I do believe that clarity is an outcome of wisdom. And that is really what is more actionable. And that's why I think people value it, because it's the outcome.
What's the opposite of clarity?
What is the opposite of clarity? It's a fair
Yeah,
question. It's a good question. Um,
like
I
confusion or something.
it could be confusion. I think it's really uh, misdirection, lack of focus.
Yeah,
It's not necessarily confusion because there are a lot of really smart people out there. They're not confused, but they're just distracted. Um, and so it's a tough one. I don't know if there's a singular word to explain the opposite of clarity.
yeah. But when you get clarity, what do you think? What would you say? So you said it's the outcome of wisdom, right? So wisdom comes before clarity and leads to it. What follows as a consequence of gaining clarity then? Or you could say, what do you think are the main benefits of improving your clarity?
Yeah, I think once again another fabulous question. I think it's focus. It's focus on that which matters most. It's you always want to be looking at your next best move, your next best alternative. Disregard the things that really have no impact. And this really gets back to the connection with Stoicism, which is hey, you can worry about a lot of things, but some things are not worth worrying about. You can't do anything about them. So, what is it that you can do? What is it that is actionable? What is it that is in your best interest to do next? And disregard many of the things that just cloud your mind and really push back on your ability to be productive in the moment.
And having your priorities straight, maybe I think
Absolutely.
is something that you're kind of implying there. Like, I wonder if this is just asking a similar question from a different perspective, but that can be helpful sometimes. What are the what? Why don't people already have clarity? Like, and that's one of my favorite questions to ask about stuff. How
Yeah.
come we don't have it already? Like, what stops us from having clarity? What's getting in the way?
Yeah, I think one of the things that gets in the way is we are living in this and this is nothing new. I mean, this happened 2,000 years ago, but we get distracted by things, whether it's our emotions or our internal conflicts or just the outside world around us. There's so many other stimuli that we have that we give weight to that we might not. And I think there's kind of a section towards the end of the book that I think is really powerful, which talks about, let's say, our relationship with time. And one of the things with our relationship with time, there are three factors I think that are important to think about is sequencing, timing, and patience. A lot of times we know what to do. We just do things in the wrong order.
Yeah,
And we do them at the wrong time. And in order to do things in the right order at the right time, we have to be patient many times. And we are impatient as
Yeah.
humans. We want results now. And being able to know the sequence with which to do things and the timing with which to do things, and having the patience to adhere to that discipline is, I think, one of the toughest things we struggle with as humans. And it's an age old problem. There's nothing new there, but I'd like breaking it down into those three elements.
Interesting. And so, what when you were working on the book, what do you think are the main influences that you drew upon? So it sounds like to a large extent you're drawing on your prior experience, right? But was there any, and you looked at Stoicism and stuff like that, I know, but was there any other literature or any thinkers or, any other traditions that particularly fed into what you were doing?
Um, I mean, there's a lot. There's a lot there. Granted, all my prior experiences with my clients and myself, fed into, kind of the very pragmatic nature of the book. Certainly all the books that I've read, including yours, and all the guests we've had on the leadership podcast, where we've talked to, people who favored prominently are like Dr. Cialdini, on his book on influence, and Dan Pink and some of his work. I thought, that stuff really factored deeply. Kahneman's work on, thinking fast and slow factored deeply into kind of the psychology of how we think and make decisions and what distracts us and how we're biased. I think a lot of that work factors in there. Certainly, being Greek and having an interest in, the philosophical pursuits and the Stoics is helpful. But I think one of the things that came out that was a surprise to me was a very, the influence of my parents, my grandparents on, how I thought. And I realized that it wasn't just, let's say, my religious upbringing that was important to me, but like I was raised in like with Stoicism is like the foundation of like how we lived our lives. And I didn't realize it until like, I was going through this like really deep evaluation of my history and going, gosh, this is like sounds everything like my grandmother used to say. I mean, it's just like she was, the stoic in my life. And I just thought that was really interesting because so many of these principles apply in both worlds.
But that leads me into another question that's related to what you were just saying, which is, to put it kind of glibly, if you bumped into someone in the street who had a lot of clarity, you meet some dude or some gal who's got exemplary clarity. How would you know? Like, what is it that you would spot in someone? What is it that would tell you like this person's got a lot of clarity
Yeah,
in their
it's
life?
and I use a lot of analogies in the book, and I've always used that in my coaching and my business advice that I give to people, and I think they really are sometimes more powerful than anything else. Um, but it would be a calm state, a calm and unflustered state. And the analogy I always use is, when I was coaching youth sports, with kids, there was a kind of a moment in every kid's progression where instead of like panicking when they had the ball and like really being flustered or not knowing what to do next, like there was a moment where it just clicked. And, if you observe that moment, it was just such a fantastic thing where all of a sudden, like the game slowed down for them and they became calm. And instead of seeing obstacles, they saw opportunities. And, some kids got there quickly. Other kids, took longer to get there, but it was always kind of a fantastic moment. And I noticed that with, clients I was working with consultants I was trying to teach to get to a higher level of, consulting skill. There was a moment where you might be flustered going into a meeting. And then, there was a point where it's like, okay, you're now calm. You're in control. You've seen things before. You have clarity on like what to disregard and what to assess and what to dig deeper on. And that's, I think the outward observation is just a calm and unflustered kind of mentality, which I think is, what we all seek in life.
What do you think the main benefits of that would be in terms of somebody's relationships? So we've kind of mentioned, like for you, I think it's the business side of things. Like we could ask, how does clarity help people in their career or at work. But do you see someone who's achieved that state of mind as having improved their relationships with their friends and their family, the spouse, and so on? How do you think it influences other people around them when somebody's achieved that?
Oh, it's an enormous influence. And like the number one thing we have in life is our relationships. And the older you get, the more that becomes just openly apparent. And yeah, I think one of the things that I think a greater sense of clarity brings to you is, and let's say in the business world, this comes very commonly with salespeople, like, oh my gosh, this person didn't call me back. What did I do? And what did I say something wrong? Is my price too high? They got all these fears running around in their head, and it might not be any of that. The clarity to say, let me take a step back and just say, maybe they're busy. Okay. Maybe they've got something else going on in their life. Maybe it's the, middle of August and they're taking a child to college. Maybe it's the beginning of September and they're getting a kid ready for school. Maybe they're dealing with a health issue with a parent or a spouse. There might be something else going on, and just having that ability to take a step back, not have the world revolve around you, but to see all the things that are possibly going on and to say, to get a broader context of a situation and to get the calm that comes from that. I think that's just, something that comes with maturity and age. And, hopefully you get it sooner than later. Hopefully you get it at all. I don't know. Some people never do, probably.
Well, some people get it and then they lose it, like many
Sure.
things in life. So, and I think that's actually a fairly common experience that people have. I remember the psychologist Carl Jung said that he felt as if there were two versions of himself. And there was one version that was really wise and kind of serene and intelligent. And then there's this other version that kept screwing things up, like and letting him down and stuff. And he thought he'd step back. He had this experience that many people have of looking at things in retrospect, thinking, how did I end up losing my temper in that situation? I know better than
Yeah.
that. Sitting here in my armchair reflecting on it afterwards, I can't understand why I couldn't handle that situation. So, how do people, and I think everybody exhibits some degree of clarity at some point in life in some situations. So, how do they end up losing it, do you think? And what can they do to hang on to it better?
Yeah. It's,
How do we avoid losing it?
that's a good question. How do we avoid losing it? I think, we're always in this war, between like our emotional kind of self and our rational self. And, that's, I think most of philosophy talks about the struggle. Most of, psychotherapy talks about these struggles between these two worlds. And I think, more than anything, it balances. I think the word I would go after is when you find yourself out of balance, how do you rebalance yourself and just say, wait, I'm getting a little bit too heavy over here on my emotions. And it's not that emotions are bad. They're necessary. I think, we've found through research, if you have like the emotional part of your brain destroyed, you actually can't function. You can't make decisions. Even the simplest decisions are impossible. So I think everything, whether it's good leadership or clarity or anything else, it's all about balance. And I think what we need to do is find that balance. And when we find ourselves out of balance, take a step back and say, how do I restore it? And maybe I need to, and it's not just our emotions that get the better of us sometimes when we, respond, in a way. It's like, hey, maybe I'm being a bit too logical here. Let me consider someone else's feelings with a greater degree of empathy. And I think when you find yourself out of balance is when you should, reassess and try and find center yourself somehow.
And so I guess that raises the question, how do we, and this is a bit of a segue, I suppose, into the content of your book. How do you help other people then? That is, we've talked about what clarity is, how you could gain it, how you could lose it. Like, as a coach, for example, or as the author of a book in the subject, what do you think are the best ways to help other people improve their clarity?
Yeah, it's such a complicated thing because I wish I could, I wrote a book on this. I wish I could say like, here are the 5 things you need to do and write the LinkedIn article that everyone would read, But the reality is it's not that simple. And And it really gets back to the concept of balance. And let's consider when you're learning to ride a bike. Um, you know, I could have you read a book on balance. I could have you, study up on like, hey, or here's how, balance works. But you can't understand it until you experience it. And so, that's why we put training wheels on a bike and we have people ride, and then we slowly raise up the training wheels. So maybe you've got that feeling of safety, but you're still now experiencing balance. And that's why even the people that we trust most in our life, when we go to take the training wheels off and learn to ride a bike on two wheels, tell you, I'm not going to let go. And they run down the street with you. And then you start experiencing balance. And then you realize they've let go. And I think a lot of times coaching people towards clarity, and the best thing is people have to experience it to believe and trust in it, and to believe that one, they can do it for themselves. That's really the key is, you can get someone like me to help you see things more clearly. But the goal is not for me to always be there. The goal is to say, hey, I want you to see how you can find that balance without the training wheels on your own, and how you can get to the point where you can say, okay, I've experienced it now and I appreciate it. And, if you keep someone like me around, it's like, great, I'll maybe tip you a little bit, influence you a little back when I see you out of balance or something, like you're not thinking about this right. But I think it's something that's hard to give a prescription for. You have to experience it. And so as a coach or as an advisor, I think it's important to say, let's walk this together. I might run alongside you for a little while. You get your confidence, but you need to, my goal always needs to be, how can you establish your own balance? And how can you feel it? And once you feel it, then you understand it.
So if they read your book, when did you say it's coming out? It's coming out pretty soon, isn't it?
October 18th. Yeah.
On the 18th of October. Like, if they read your book, what are they going to get from that? What are the main topics that you cover in the content of the book?
Yeah, I think it's got kind of 5 sections, and you're kind of like peeling back the onion. And it's very business focused, although I'd say I'd be fooling you if I wasn't intentional on saying there's a higher, level of thinking about it. You can probably think about it on several different planes with regard to, your personal life and with regard to society at large. But, we try and peel back the onion and just say, hey, here are the symptoms that you typically see in business that you can kind of, that distract us. And a lot of these things that we think are the real problems that are just really symptoms, because the symptoms in general are just outcomes. Culture is an outcome. It's not something you actively manage. It's something that's an outcome of every decision you make. And we can get distracted by, oh, we've got to fix our culture. It's like, no, there's probably something else that's going on. The outcome is an unhealthy culture. So then we go back and I say, like, of all the business problems I've ever kind of dealt with as a consultant for many, many years now, there are some common ones. And typically these common buckets, this is where the problems typically are. It's not to say that's where all problems are, but they typically fall into these buckets. Let's understand those buckets and let's see how they work. And what is really going on there. And then beyond that, as we peel back the onion deeper, and this is where I think it interests maybe, where you influenced me more, is where are the emotional biases? Where are the cognitive biases, logical fallacies, our emotions, our lack of context affect and really hinder our thinking? Then we get into, a little deeper about, sequencing, timing, and patience to understand, okay, now here's the order of precedence to kind of go through things. And then in the end, I kind of explain, really it's a number of different things, but, curiosity is, just the most important thing. It's the key to the kingdom that kind of opens everything else, because that curiosity opens a door. Then you pave the way towards something I call conscious competence, which is knowing why things are the way they are and why they happen. So you're not just competent, you're conscious, about the nuances that influence things. And that really results and culminates in business wisdom, which is, at the end of the day, the thing we're all seeking, that is the, gateway to clarity.
One of the questions you'll often hear people asking about any self-improvement technique or anything like that, psychotherapy and stuff, is that there'll always be somebody at some point that says, isn't this all just common sense? And the answer to that is, I think, yes and no in most cases. Like, because I always have the feeling like not everything. Psychotherapy is a complicated subject, but over the years, many of the things that I'm focusing on with clients, I think, sure, at some level, this is definitely common sense. Like, because as you implied earlier, what's common is common actually, and you'll see everyone's unique, but you'll also tend to see similar things
Mm-hmm.
happening over and over again with people, and similar solutions will work. And so the puzzling thing is, why aren't we all smarter and wiser? We've had thousands of years to figure this out. Like, we often end up in the same problems over and over again throughout history. It often feels like we're reinventing the wheel, especially when it comes to managing our lives and our emotions and so on. So, it sounds a bit cheeky to ask that question, isn't this all just common sense? But I think you probably share a similar experience to me, which is, yeah, of course, at some level it is. Like, but you could fill a book with common sense, and it would be a revelation to the majority of people when they read it. But they could, often it's stuff that they kind of shoulda or coulda known already. Like, or often people hear good advice, but it kind of goes in one ear and out the other. Like, like you say about finding balance, often they have to have an experience, and they have a big epiphany, a big revelation. And what they realize is something that at some level they've known all along,
Mm-hmm.
but they never really understood the significance of it. So I just wonder, from that perspective, to what extent do you think you're teaching people stuff that they know already, or is common sense? Um,
There's nothing new here. This is all common sense. There's nothing new. What is new is, and this is what I think resonates with people, it's packaging. It's
mhm.
how do you package it? So you sit there and you say, okay, I could read Meditations, but I bought your book because you repackaged it better for
Yeah,
me.
meditation. Even Marcus Aurelius Meditations. You could read that and go, a lot of this is common sense. People do that. They read
Yeah.
it and they say this is common sense, but it's still very valuable.
No, and it's great, and I've read it and I love it and it's fantastic. But I like the way you repackage the story because it at the time I read How to Think Like a Roman Emperor, I was like, oh, this is what spoke to me. And then you kind of repackage it again in like the graphic novel, even, and you sit there
Yeah,
and you say like, that's just a different repackaging. So I look at this and say, I don't know if I've come up with anything. I know I haven't come up with anything new. This is common sense, and much of this is common sense that came to me through my parents and my grandparents in my own personal experiences, but it's packaged in a way that might resonate with people, and that's really what you hope is, And I think that the comforting part for it for me is that it's a message worth repeating, right?
yeah, yeah. It's timeless. Like, it's a kind of perennial wisdom would be another way of saying. I guess that's what I'm going to say next time someone says to me, "Is this not all just common sense?" I'm going to say, "No, it's perennial wisdom."
Yeah, I like that.
That
Yeah, I
sounds
like that.
cooler. Like, but it kind of it. Like, I'd say yes and no. Like, because it's like a mystery in broad daylight. You know,
Yeah.
Aaron Beck, the founder of cognitive therapy, once said, "There's more to the surface than meets the eye." Like, people don't notice what is right there before them every day. And actually, like you said, we all know what one of the reasons that we all know this already is because we have all a lifetime of experience of seeing other people around us, and even reading books and watching movies where we think that guy is coping badly
Hmm.
and this guy's coping better. Like, so we all know already what someone looks like when they're going under, and what someone looks like when they're dealing with things with clarity and wisdom
Hmm.
in their life. We can generally spot that. So why can't we just do it ourselves? Like, I'd know if I saw someone else do it to some extent, because we spot things around us and we're very familiar with it, but we seem to struggle to emulate those qualities or to articulate them sometimes.
Well, our
Maybe.
toughest challenge is ourself,
Mhm.
in life. Our biggest challenge is seeing ourselves clearly. And that's why, having good friends, having good mentors, having good coaches is important, because, it's very difficult to kind of see. It's
Yeah.
easy to see someone else's problems. It's really tough to see your own. And that's just the eternal challenge, nothing new.
One of Aesop's fables says that everybody is born with two sacks hanging around their neck. They have a big sack hanging in front of them, right under their nose, all day, every day, that contains everybody else's flaws and is very visible to them, like an expert on what everyone else is doing wrong.
Yeah.
And then there's a smaller sack that hangs behind our head and behind our back, that we can never really see. Like, but it contains all of our own flaws, and everyone else can see it.
Yeah.
Like, but we've got a kind of blind spot for it. Basically, is the point that he's trying to make. And so this is a perennial problem that we suffer from, these blind spots and this difficulty applying wisdom in our own lives.
Hmm.
Um, and it can help to have a mentor or a parent or a counselor or a psychotherapist or an advisor. But to what extent do you think someone can attain clarity without help from another individual? So there's a challenge here. It's tricky, because you can't see your own biases very clearly. But are there ways around it? Like, are we beyond hope unless somebody comes and saves us? Like, do we? To what extent do you think somebody can dig themselves out of the hole? Like, if they don't have someone like you as a coach or a mentor that could help them identify the blind spots, to what extent can they do it on their own?
That's another excellent question. What I would say is, you don't need to have, a formal relationship with anyone, but you do need to have feedback. If you have no feedback, it's a guarantee you're going to be lost or you're going to be off track.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like trying to navigate without, knowing where you are on the map.
Mm-hmm.
If you get no feedback for where you are on the map, there's no landmark to say like I'm in the right place, or if there's no GPS feedback
Yeah.
telling me like I'm off track or I'm on track, you can't make any progress. So I think, if you were to embark on this journey and say, I don't want a coach or a mentor or anyone else, you need to have people in your life that will give you feedback, and you need to actively solicit feedback. Now, you can do it, but it's far more difficult, And then my question to anyone who's like, I want to do it all on my own. It's like, okay, you want to do it all on your own. You want to solicit all this feedback. Why do you want to take the hard path?
Mm-hmm.
What about you is keeping you from wanting to take an easier path? And what is it that is driving you towards this, stubbornness of not accepting it? And there's a different issue there. And the real issue keeping you from clarity is hidden in that question,
Mm-hmm.
not in, anything else.
I'll tell you a story, Jim. That's an old story. It's 2,500 years old. So it comes from ancient Greece. Um, and it's about an unlikely hero, like a guy, famous Greek statesman, or notorious, some might say, called Alcibiades or Alcibiades. And he was the friend, some would say the lover, of Socrates. Um, and Plato writes about, many authors in the ancient world wrote about the dynamic or relationship between them. Many of those writings are lost, but we have a dialogue called The First Alcibiades by Plato that survives today. And in it, Socrates talks about the famous inscription at the entrance to the temple at Delphi that says Gnothai Auton, or know thyself. And Socrates said he's puzzled by this because if you ask people, hey, do you know yourself, buddy? At the most superficial level, they'd say, well, I know what I look like in a mirror. I know my name, you know. And Socrates would say, I think it means something else. You haven't really understood the significance of it. It's much harder to know yourself than you realize. It's more than just knowing your name. Um, and he says it's difficult. for us to know ourselves because we have a blind spot. He says, I would compare it to if the god Apollo instructed us. He said, if the god Apollo spoke to you and said, I want your eye to see itself, how would it do that? It would be like a camera filming itself or something like that. Have a blind spot. It can't do it. But then he goes on, as Socrates always does, to say something from going to say something that's kind of banal and common sense. He ends up saying something really super weird. So what he then says is, there is a situation where the eye can see itself by looking at somebody else. And Alcibiades is kind of puzzled at first, and then he remembers something which I don't think I would have thought of, but he says, "You're right, Socrates." He said, "If you look into someone's eyes, sometimes you can glimpse your own reflection if you look very closely in the pupil of their eye." Is that what you're talking about? And Socrates says that's exactly what I'm talking about. He said if you look at any other part of someone's body, like their forehead or their arms or their legs, you won't see your reflection. But if you look really deeply into their eyes, you can kind of glimpse your reflection. Strangely, by looking at the very thing that they use to see with. So the eye looking at the eye can glimpse itself. And he said this is a metaphor for the Socratic method. He said by using our intellect to examine the intellect of other people, we can glimpse sometimes our reflection of our own soul.
Yeah.
Right? Because if we spot errors that they make and assumptions that they hold that we perhaps share, we understand their biases. It can give us some insight into our own biases, which otherwise we would have a blind spot for. Some people think it's really strange that Socrates was besties with Alcibiades because they seem like completely opposite characters. He was kind of notorious for being very reckless and kind of ruined Athens militarily, argue like to some extent. He's one of the most controversial figures in Greek history. So people thought, what on earth did Socrates see in this guy, funnily enough? And I think the strange answer to that would have to be, based on the first Alcibiades, that what Socrates saw in that guy was his own mirror image, which seems like a very bizarre thing to say because they're really opposite figures. But I think Socrates saw his own weaknesses, vulnerabilities, flaws, and biases in this young man. And he'd kind of transcended them himself, but he still recognized that he had these vulnerabilities. He would talk about that. He'd say that I still have desires and weaknesses and things like that. But reason and philosophy have helped me to master them. But by working with other people and addressing their misconceptions and weaknesses, it helps me to gain more wisdom myself. I wonder to what extent we can gain clarity. Well, let me put it this way. I guess this is what I'm leading up to. To what extent do you gain clarity yourself by helping your clients?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, my two greatest teachers in life have been my children. You'd think it'd be the other way around, but they've taught me more than anyone else in the world. Of course, your parents and the people you'd expect to be teaching you, but my clients, and honestly, it's one of the reasons why I've told a number of people is like, listen, I don't think I ever really want to retire. I'm sure someday someone will retire me. But steel sharpens steel, right? And so what you want to do is you want to engage with as many smart people as possible. I never position myself as knowing more than my clients. It's one of those things where it's like, but together, steel sharpens steel, and we learn from one another. And I will tell you that I've learned so much more, and the book is written actually in story format. Like there are stories embedded within there that are, fictional stories, but they come from lessons that are really gleaned from my client experiences and I've had some clients teach me things about leadership and teach me things about stuff that I thought, wow, that was amazing what they did there. And so I do think that we learn from our interactions with other people, which is why I say I never really want to retire, because if I say I want to retire and not engage with other people on this intellectual level, then that basically says I'm kind of done learning. And I can't imagine that day.
Mhm. It's funny because I think sometimes you make a choice in life whether you are out for yourself or whether you're out for other people to some extent. Many people see it that way. They go, I don't have time to go around helping other people. I'm too busy, like, try to help myself. But I think many people that work in helping professions, or psychotherapists, or counselors, or coaches, looking back in their life, would say, by helping other people, it's one of the best ways that we come to help ourselves. Partly because of this bias that we mentioned. If you're just trying to say you're just out there trying to do self improvement, improve your own life, it's hard because you've got biases. But
Mhm.
when you're helping other people, you potentially try to transcend those biases. You can see their problems more objectively, and that helps you to gain perspective on your own problems. So, actually, helping others at the end of the day turns out to be one of the best ways, one of the healthiest and most balanced ways, I think, of helping ourselves.
Yeah. It's interesting because I do a lot of work supporting veterans. And, I have a great deal of respect for people who've served to protect, my ability to complain about slow Wi-Fi or, a lukewarm coffee. So, I'm always very passionate about helping them. And one of the pieces of advice I used to give all the time was, hey, right now you're in transition, you're leaving the military, you're starting your professional life. Be a bit selfish, don't worry about helping other people. Just kind of, do that. And over the years, as I've helped a lot of different people, that's one piece of advice I've changed because through the feedback with several veterans and some other folks, and just basically what you articulated, um, people have said, go and help other people because that will help you. And it will help you through your transition. And I found the feedback I've gotten since I kind of changed that advice has been really positive in that it actually works better than trying to be selfish for a little while. And that was a big learning for me because it was counterintuitive.
Yeah,
But in retrospect, it's like that was the right advice.
it's a paradox.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, the language that we use of self improvement, self help, is all quite biased in terms of this quite introverted
Mm-hmm.
perspective. And it turns out the irony is other help is the best form of self help. Other improvement is the best form of self improvement. There's a risk that self help and self improvement, because of the way it's traditionally framed, is quite inward looking and maybe misses the very thing that would be most beneficial for us. Is there anything else that you wanted to add while we've got the chance about the book? What else would people take away from it if they were to pick up a copy and read it?
I guess to carry on with your point, which I think is great, and I just love this discussion. I mean, I always enjoy speaking with you. It's always such a good discussion. Is there's no value in wisdom. Wisdom doesn't come into existence unless you share it.
Yeah.
It does not exist. It needs to be shared to exist. And that is, I think, the essence of what you and I have been talking about here for the last so many minutes. It's, you can have wisdom, but if it doesn't leave your brain, it doesn't leave your mouth. The reality is it doesn't exist. And so that's why it's incumbent upon all of us to kind of interact with one another in a way that's trying to help everyone else. And that's really the mission of this book is like, listen, I've learned some things and I want to share them and I want to put it out there because if I don't, what good am I doing? Am I living a life worth living if I am not willing to share that? And
Mhm.
so, that's all I want. And if a few people go, hey, I'm going to pick that up and give it a gander, then I've served my purpose.
I can't remember exactly who it was now. I've got a hunch it might have been Cicero who just mentioned in passing or observed that if somebody makes a discovery, they suddenly figure something out. They have an epiphany or a revelation, and it's about something important. He said it's only human nature that the first thing that they want to do is rush out the door and tell their friends. Like he said, we instinctively, no one arrives at a great insight and then thinks, I'm going to keep that to myself.
Yeah.
Like we naturally want to share wisdom. We have an instinct. Interestingly, like a very pro-social instinct. We want to run out the door and shout it from the rooftops if we think we've suddenly, like discovered something important. So I think it's fundamental to human nature in a way to that we want to share our wisdom with other people, and it's part of what makes human history is the transmission of these ideas and the recycling of them and the reframing of them, passing them down from one generation to the next. It's what defines us, our culture and our humanity in a way. And I think it's a constant process. So your perspective is framing it not so much in terms of wisdom, but in terms of the clarity that we can achieve on the problems that we face. And I think that will resonate
Thank you.
with a lot of other people. In some ways, it's maybe a more contemporary way of looking at things. I think, there are many people that would say, you mentioned this earlier, but there are many people today, I think, that feel that they're struggling with clarity because they are overwhelmed. They're confused. They're distracted.
Hmm.
Like they drink from a fire hose
Yeah.
of information, or is it? Is I don't even know if it is information. Like junk, like off the internet. A lot of it is barely even. It doesn't merit the name information. Like, but stuff they
Hmm.
consume, and it's overwhelming, I think, for a lot of people. And I think that's one of the reasons that there's probably a desire for them to find stability and clarity in their thinking. They could sit and watch YouTube videos all day long about self improvement, until their eyes melt. But a lot of the information that they're going to get is off at a tangent or contradictory or bad advice or it doesn't really resonate with them. And at the end of the day, there's only one person that the buck stops with when it comes to self-improvement, and that is ourselves. We depend on our own judgment. We can
Hmm.
refine it, as we said, in dialogue with other people. um, but that's one of the reasons I think that we need something like wisdom or clarity to guide us, because ultimately, it doesn't matter how much self help or psychology we have access to. We have to figure out what we're going to do with that information.
Yeah.
And so we need to be able to think clearly about it. And it's a struggle to do so when we're bombarded with so much advice. So I think if you, I don't know if you can sum up so easily, but if there was one key piece of advice that you'd like people to take away from your book, what do you, in a nutshell, if somebody was thinking about picking it up and reading it, what would you tell them is the main takeaway that you'd like them to derive from, or you'd hope that they could take?
If I had to say, the key to the kingdom is curiosity. You have to be curious. You have to dig deep. You have to just not accept things for what they are. You have to understand, and the only way you do that is by being curious. And all the other good things happen if you are curious. Everything else falls into place. But that is the one that without that, it's very difficult to achieve anything other than just
Wow.
temporary satisfaction of calming maybe some symptoms of what you're dealing with. It's
Mhm.
curiosity is really where it starts. All the goodness spawns from that.
I think it was Plato that said philosophy begins with a sense of wonder,
Yeah.
which is kind of reminds me of what you're saying. Well, with that, I think that's a good point to wrap things up for today. I'm very grateful for your time, Jim. So I'd like to
As am
thank my
I.
guest, Jim Vasilopoulos. And thanks to all our listeners for tuning in. Please share this episode with your friends online. Post your comments below. And with that, it's goodbye from me and goodbye from Jim. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Donald.
Cheers.